With the latest gameplay trailers for both Sonic Frontiers and Pokémon Violet and Scarlet releasing recently, there is more than a lot to discuss. The swelling anticipation for a new mainline Sonic title nearly 5 years after Sonic Forces is becoming more and more palpable as we slowly begin to uncover new details and begin new discussions about Frontiers. And my personal interest in how Pokémon Violet and Scarlet can take a real stab at rejuvenating a 25-year-old formula continues to grow as we inch closer and closer to the slated holiday season as well. With that being said, as I've been analyzing these most recent looks at these two very major upcoming releases, I can't help but to further feel justified by my recurring sentiment on how dominant Breath of the Wild's reinvention of the Zelda series has impacted the landscape of the neighboring properties around it within the gaming industry. Let's talk about it. There was a lot of hype and expectations for Breath of the Wild when it finally surfaced over half a decade ago. It was initially supposed to be the Wii U's flagship Zelda title, but many factors led to it becoming the leading launch title for the Switch. The market was getting dissatisfied with Nintendo titles to a degree, and everybody was aware that the Wii U was a quickly sinking ship. A decision that ultimately would benefit the game from many aspects exponentially for years to come, especially since the game would go on to swiftly become the best-selling title in the history of the Legend of Zelda franchise, as well as giving the Switch a strong foundation to start its run on. The stark changes on Zelda's tried and true gameplay and structure in Breath of the Wild is still the topic of torn opinion, but there is no denying that the game set a new principle for open-world titles, and observing the games in the genre that followed Zelda in 2017, it's an obvious claim to make. Arguably, the biggest impact of Breath of the Wild on the genre was setting an open world that conveyed an environment full of purpose. A lot of games fall short on that and end up with hubs that feel like a waste of space due to minimal interactive creativity, whether that is due to a lack of content or simply the player growing tired of repetitive busywork taking up the open world space. Zelda resolves this issue through its thorough game design, carefully placing puzzles nearly everywhere in different formats like the shrines, Korok puzzles, and other quests. The radio tower mechanic that was popular in larger Ubisoft games, is it Ubisoft or Ubisoft?
Ubisoft.
The radio tower mechanic that was popular in larger Ubisoft games was also reintroduced, with each tower link reaches presenting a new challenge. The game's mechanics were even comprehensive enough to let the players experiment enough to vastly extend the game's playtime. Breath of the Wild also gave the player great freedom and guidance simultaneously, allowing them to easily stay on a linear path and not stressing exploration, while also giving the player free rein to play the game in any order or direction they desire. Designing easy-to-understand geography that unconsciously guides the player towards enemy encounters, gathering resources, and discovering shrines in an efficient amount of time. Breath of the Wild's entirety can lure players toward new content, an impressive direction for an open-world title, and shows that there is still space for games in that genre to grow even further. Combining that with Zelda's standard puzzles created an experience that was prone to get lost in for a very long time, with no walls in the player's way except for the ones that they put on themselves. Of course, I doubt games like Sonic Frontiers can replicate much of Breath of the Wild deeper than the visual angle, but they can still learn plenty from the game. Spacing the meat and potatoes of the game and pointing players to unrequired content have been given much more favor in recent light, giving games like Elden Ring the point of attack it needs to fulfill the scope of the game from a content perspective. Much of Zelda's cues have made its way into other games, and a popular spiritual successor like Genshin Impact wouldn't have nailed them so well without having Breath of the Wild as a base. I haven't personally seen a game try to replicate Zelda's quest design, but there is a looming acknowledgement around allowing players to divulge into grounds that they aren't strong enough to venture yet. That being said, if there's one takeaway that the video game industry as a whole received from Breath of the Wild, it is that using gliding or similar apparatuses to travel the large amount of land available is fun. Paragliders began popping up frequently shortly following Breath of the Wild's success, as the mechanic was one of the effortless and quickest ways to cover ground. In recent months, vertically inclined games like Horizon Forbidden West and Dying Light 2 are putting emphasis on letting players access their gliders after a brief prologue. Even Pokémon Legends Arceus, a game that I have intimately touched on around its attempt to garner hype around directly suggesting it would be similar in scope to Breath of the Wild in some degree, opens up the ability for trainers to fly freely around and throughout the environment. Fans of the innovative Grand Theft Auto series have valued air travel for decades now, but it was Breath of the Wild that modernized it for linear and non-linear advantage. As of now, I don't think any game in the genre since has reached the praise and legacy Breath of the Wild has garnered in the view of the general public. But many, like the aforementioned Elden Ring, have come close, feeding its own open world with plenty of content. From what it seems, Red Dead Redemption 2 has utilized Zelda as a goalpost for its mechanics to polish the occurrence of realistic movement. Ghost of Tsushima has cited Zelda's differing manners of combat and redefinitions in steering the player on the right path, and even newer installments in Assassin's Creed have some Breath of the Wild points of reference to add to its exploration, shifting focus of the series' notorious stealth and platforming. Breath of the Wild will be cited as an inspiration for decades to follow, because titles like that will only surface every now and then. But players will always be prone to compare the newest game to Breath of the Wild as a point of quality or satisfaction, much like other genre-redefining games like Ocarina of Time, when it redefined its own lane 20 years prior. The discussion will either strengthen or weaken once Breath of the Wild 2 finally releases, as I'm sure it will open discussions of constant comparisons to the original. We don't even know where the series will go post Breath of the Wild, but it may be best to eventually steer clear from the Breath of the Wild formula for some time to stay creative and keep the industry fluent, being aware of the weight that Zelda series holds over the industry's history over the years and in the current day. Because Breath of the Wild isn't exiting the forefront of the industry anytime soon based on how its reach is so blatantly seen in today's largest releases, and with new mechanics and points to appreciate about the game still surfacing all these years later, I think it's no overstatement to truly call Breath of the Wild one of gaming's modern blueprints. With that being said, that is just how I view the influence of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild on the video game industry in these last 5 years. And with some of the cues we have seen from the early looks at major games this year, like the aforementioned Sonic Frontiers and Pokémon Scarlet and Violet, that influence may only grow as time passes and consumers continue to further attach those inklings to game quality or scope of experience. How do you feel about Breath of the Wild-esque titles in this current market? How do you feel about recent looks at Sonic and Pokémon, or even how the open world angle was hyped in the rollout of Pokémon Legends Arceus? Let me know in the comments below. If you made it to the end of the video, I truly appreciate you. And if you enjoyed, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. We just hit 1,000 friends, and I got a special celebration video coming up for you all. And as always, take care, good game, and thank you for watching. Peace.